So, Walter,
Yeah.
thank you for being my crash test dummy on podcast episode 1 of No Boundaries podcast. I'm really excited to have you here. Really excited for the conversation. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time, and I wanted you to be the first guest for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly and foremostly, I'd talk to you about, I think you're an impeccable example of what a good man should aim to be. And you've been that in my life, and you've been a very great example for me to lean on as a young man who grew up without a father and without father figures or manly figures in my life and had a pretty unhealthy upbringing. It was quite a gift to meet you and to get to know you, and the way you welcomed me into your life has been very impactful in ways that you may never know, but I think for me this was a way to kind of create a vignette of you selfishly for me that I could always look back on and then also share who you are as a man with the rest of the world. And so, welcome to the No Boundaries podcast, everyone. I'm truly glad that you're here. And if you're watching this video, you're literally one of the first. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to ask you one simple favor. If you enjoy this video and the content that I create, please take the time to hit that subscribe button. It'll help this channel grow more than you know. It'll allow me to continue to scale the production and lure in better and better guests over time, which obviously is my goal. I candidly went a long time consuming a lot of content on YouTube without hitting that subscribe button. But once I realized how valuable it is and how meaningful it is, I hit that thing rigorously on content that suits my interests. It literally costs us nothing, but yet is so exceptionally meaningful. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy this video. Firstly, I just want to kind of introduce how I know you, so people watching can understand. Is when I was in grad school, went to USC, and I went through this program called the Masters of Business for Veterans. And since it wasn't technically a regular way MBA program, we didn't get kind of the resources for hiring and stuff like that they get for the MBA guys because they get ranked. And so, understandably so, they aim the resources at that because it helps the university. But what they did do was reach out to a bunch of different people all over the place in business and what have you, and said, hey, will you be willing to be a resource for these veterans going through this master's program? And you said yes to that. So I ended up reaching out to you via email and had lunch with you, and the rest is history. And so that's how we got to know each other, and that was around 2017, and you've been a staple in my life ever since. And like I said, I just wanted to take this moment and take this time to highlight you and have a conversation with you about your life and your experiences, because I think they're amazing, and it's an amazing story. I think it being you just see it as your own story, and it's the life you've lived, and it's maybe, you don't view it as wild or out there or as important, but I think it is. And so I just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll just rock from there.
Well, let me say, Thomas, that I really do appreciate your inviting me to your podcast. And it has been probably even more of a pleasure for me to know you. Because one of the things that, I have grown over the years to really appreciate, and that's relationships more than anything. Relationships, friendships, people that I care about, and people who are about something. And it didn't take very much when we first met for me to conclude that you were someone that I really wanted to get to know. And I'm happy to be here to support you in your new podcast venture.
Yeah, it's quite the endeavor. It's not where, when I met you, I hadn't, I'd been out of the Navy for a while, and I was working on my degree, and I had never really tapped into the civilian side of life. And then via your support and others, I was able to have a successful career in investment banking and private credit and private equity. I mean, you introduced me to Ken Langone. When I first saw your picture and thought about reaching out to you, I didn't in a million years think that reaching out to you would have me sitting in front of Ken Langone and having him call a board member of Wells Fargo and telling them that if they didn't hire me, it would be the dumbest mistake they ever made in their life, which was like a fun, cool experience. But it is interesting to have gone on this track of doing what I had always set out and wanted to do in the finance world and the investing world, And I never in a million years thought I would be sitting here in a studio like this making a podcast. It was never in the cards, but I'm glad to be doing it. And I really think that it's kind of a calling and rings true to who I am and what I value. And I'm looking forward to having great conversations with other people like this and just creating an environment where people who aren't fortunate enough like me to ever get a chance to meet you, to get a sense of who you are and maybe take some things away from how your mind works and the experiences you've been through in life and things of that nature. So I'd really love to, I mean, like I said, I think your story is amazing. I'd love for you to kind of start off the top of when you were born and where you grew up, and kind of, in a way, we'll walk through like how you got from there to today, and we'll just kind of shoot off.
No, I'd be happy to do that, and hopefully I can say something that will help someone else. Hopefully, I was born in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia. I grew up in Petersburg, Virginia. It's a very small town of 30,000 people, and I was very fortunate in those times in 1944, 45, to have had parents that I think are the American model for what a parent should be. And, you know, my mother was a very lovely woman, so I grew up with a very positive image of women. And my dad was a man's man, a highly respected man in the city, a small business owner, and he had a body and fender shop, a service station, and a fuel oil delivery business in Petersburg. And everything was segregated then when I grew up. So the images that I would see were, all my father's friends were entrepreneurs. I mean, they owned the cleaners, an African-American owned was a dentist, the doctor was an African-American, our teachers were African-American, the corner store was owned by my uncles, my dad's friends were lawyers and the various professions. So there was no short of role models, people to look at and say, there are no limitations to what I can be. There are no limitations to what I can do.
Because everybody around you was doing everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a positive and in some ways maybe negative, because I never recognized any limitations. I never recognized being black because of the color of my skin was a limitation, because first of all, we grew up in an all-black neighborhood, all-black high school that I went to, and everybody was like me, so it was a comfort zone that helped me to grow to be a very confident person in who I am.
Do you recall the type of people you and your contemporaries idolized at that time? Because when I think back to my youth, you know, I grew up in a biracial household. I had the white German side of the family and then the African American side of the family, and there was differences in priority and differences in what you focused on. And I remember, you know, when I was over at my cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff, we were watching BET and we're idolizing rap stars. I remember I used to think Tip Harris was, you know, I remember watching the movie ATL and thinking like, man, that guy really runs Atlanta and I would really love to meet him one day. And then grow up as a man now, and that's not at all who I would idolize or, you know, think is someone of outstanding character that I want to kind of emulate or get something from. And I think in my experience in my life, that's one of the biggest problems, especially in the black community or minority community, is we don't have what you had when things were segregated. And obviously segregation is wrong. But when you look at today, young black men aren't growing up in certain neighborhoods in most areas seeing lawyers and doctors and store owners. They're focused on the LeBron Jameses of the world. You know, they want to be the next basketball player. They want to be the next Jay-Z or Drake or whoever the case may be. And I think we've lost that. We've lost that. And so I'm just curious, when you were younger, who did you idolize and for what reason, or your contemporaries or whatever? Like, who were was Sidney Poitier or whatever the case may be when you were younger?
Well, there were a lot of people in my environment, and I think that my dad was the man that I admired most. He was a highly respected individual in the town, And some of the lessons that I got from working with him, when I was 9 years old, I was not an aggressive kid. I was not assertive at all. And my dad was concerned because my name was Walter Hill Jr. And of course, Jr. could not be less than. So he took me with him, and I went to work at 9 years old with him. So every day after school, I was at one of the businesses working with my dad. So I got to see how he functioned with all people, how he interacted with white people, how he interacted with black people. He treated everyone with respect, regardless to who they were. And I saw no signs of intimidation in him when we had to go among white people. So when I grew up, I guess I adopted that same attitude, and sometimes to a detriment, because I didn't realize there were some limitations to what I wasn't supposed to do, and therefore I did not see boundaries, and so sometimes it could cause some issues, but I think that everything that happened in that regard was something that led me to where I am now. So I don't have any. I've been asked many times, would I anything I would change, anything I would regret? And I say absolutely not, because everything that happened in my life experience led me to where I am now, and that's sitting here in my later mature years, and I call them super senior years, because I have my 80th birthday this year, and very, very happy and feeling grateful that I have, been given this long. But as far as the professional people, we were surrounded by them. So it was, Dr. Towns, Mr. Street was my father's attorney, and he was black, and they had this very progressive club of men's club, and they were just laden with professional men, black men.
A lot of men in suits, I imagine.
A lot of men in suits, and then the dress up, go to church on Sunday. That gave a kind of the spiritual foundation for how I would think, how I would treat others, the courage that I knew that I could always have, because I was always, I was always guided. I've always felt that. It has led to very positive outcome for me. Yeah.
So let's talk about from your childhood, and let's get to, I guess, when you're leaving the nest and you're going out and becoming your own man, like
leaving the nest.
Yeah.
I was when I decided to come to California. I was newly married. I was only 21 years old, and I decided to come to California for two reasons. One, the weather was warm, and it was large enough that I knew that I had to be opportunity for me in California, and I've never regretted that decision. The weather was a factor because you just imagine being in Chicago in the winter and you're struggling trying to get started. You don't have money, you don't have a real profession yet. You're in your development stage. So I always felt that one of the best decisions I made was to come to California, and I kind of pioneered my way out. It took me 3 months to work. My dad helped me piece together a 54 Ford at the time, and I got to Chicago and then Springfield, Illinois, where I stopped to work. And that was, but let me go back a minute. Let me go back a minute to the childhood experience, because there was an experience that I had as a young boy, 9 years old. I was given a job to collect quarters on a parking lot my dad was managing. The nearby farmers would come in town on the weekends, and they'd need a place to park. And we controlled this very large lot. And they would come in and park, and we'd charge them 25 cents to park. And without knowing it, it was to become my first lesson in red flagging, which happens to be the title of my book.
Yeah, forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
Walter's author of this book, the Think Red Flags.
Yeah, Think Red Flags.
Which has a lot of great anecdotes and great stories about how to think about business and how to make business decisions and how to think critically and kind of separate yourself from the emotions of it.
Absolutely.
And really just sit down and problem solve. And
Yes.
I think it's, applicable to life in a lot of ways, not just business. But
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
It's one of
it
the
is.
stories you mentioned in the
Absolutely.
book.
It was written to be applicable to life as well as business. And the experience that I had was because I was only 9, people would disregard my authority. They would just kind of
Dismiss you.
go away, son.
Yeah.
Dismiss them. I'm not giving you a quarter. And it was my first experience with what failure felt like.
Yeah.
I did not like the idea that I had been given this job to collect the quarter and I could not collect the quarter. It didn't feel good. Walking behind people with them just walking away from me and totally disregarding me because I was a kid. And then I had to develop what we now call some critical thinking. What can I do that would increase the possibility of being able to collect the quarter of success? Because obviously my success was measured by how many of the quarters I could collect. So then I decided that I'd walk to the people out to the edge of the parking lot and then they would just leave. And so my dad said, son, if they don't pay you the quarter, you can tell me, because what we're going to do is we can have the car towed if they don't pay. So that was after I confronted my dad and asked him, what can I do? He gave me a solution. And then as we would get close to the edge of that lot and they would get ready to leave, I would say, sir, if you don't pay the quarter, your car won't be here when you get back. 100% of the time, they would flip the quarter. And I did not mind catching the quarter after they threw it at me. And that was an experience that carried me all the way from Virginia to California, because when I was crossing country and I needed to stop in a city and get a job.
And remind us of what time frame this was.
This is 1966. 1966. And I'm crossing the country to get a job. I stop in Springfield, Illinois. One night, I was deciding that maybe we'd sleep down beside the railroad, quiet place, save money. I wouldn't have to pay for a hotel.
How was your wife at the time enjoying this journey?
She was enjoying the journey. She was committed to whatever I said, and that way she was a very wonderful person. There was no pushback. She just went along with what I was doing. And that was something that was not a good idea, okay? And I realized it. So the next morning I went and I got to a place. A guy rented me a place in the back of his house. It was a trailer, but it was a trailer that he hadn't touched probably in 10 years. It had spider webs.
A little dusty.
The mattress was damp and everything. So I rented that from him, and we cleaned out the spider webs and stayed there for one night. And then the next day, my wife was crying when I got home because, they didn't have access to a bathroom. They didn't have access. It wasn't a real place to stay.
Yeah.
And then I had the experience of going to a woman driving down the street, 3:30 during the day. No one's on the street. There's one lady in her yard raking. This one lady. And I stopped and I said, ma'am, do you have an idea as to where we might be able to find a place to stay? And she said, come on in. And miraculously, this lady who never seen me before, never met me before, offered me a room in her home, my wife and I. I'm not sure people do that nowadays. I'm not sure that's done anymore.
I don't think if I tried to go cross country with a couple dollars in my pocket and a rickety car that I just slapped together that I'd fare as well as you did, but I could be wrong.
Well, I don't claim that I fared well because I was clever or any of that. I always felt that I was guided. I feel like my life, the spiritual part of my life has been the most important part. And I felt that I was guided. When I went to get a job in that town and I approached the owner of a 5 and dime store, he said to me, "Son, I appreciate your effort, but I have a guy coming back, and he is going to be back in a week. So I can't hire you now because you'd only be here for a week." The collecting the quarter experience was about to pay off. Because someone was telling me no, it doesn't mean I was supposed to turn and bow my head and just walk away.
Yeah.
It means I have not given them enough rationale in order for them to say yes. So as he walked away, I walked behind him, the same as I did with the 25 cents quarter thing for parking. And he finally turned and said, "Okay, I'll let you work for 1 week then." That's all I needed was a week because I was there temporarily. There was a man at the counter that owned the Black Angus Steakhouse. And he turned to me and he said he heard me persevering and was impressed with it and said, "Son, come by my restaurant after you work here and I'll have more work for you." So I ended up with 2 jobs. So that is kind of the story of my whole trip. It happened that way from Virginia all the way out. People lending me a hand, not my brilliance. Nothing that I did was so sensational other than I learned to persevere and offer some kind of value proposition that people would eventually tell me yes.
And I imagine you had to be an effective communicator at the end of the day. It wasn't, you had to comport yourself in such a way and communicate in such a way that it really would land with people and they would appreciate. I mean, that's one of the, not to get too tangential, but the first time we met, you made me had a realization that I'd never really thought about before. And one of the things growing up is I had very poor English language skills. I mean, I wasn't illiterate by any stretch of the imagination, but like I said, growing up in a mixed home, there's a way you talk when you're at home with the German side of the family, and then there's a way you talk when you're hanging out with your cousins, and I realized very early on when I joined the Navy that if I spoke the way I spoke growing up, that people wouldn't take me seriously.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me very early on. So it's something that I've taken a lot of pride in over time, is developing my skills with language. And I mentor some young kids now who they speak in odd, how do I don't even know a way to really word it. They don't use language the way language is meant to be used, and they'll say things that you have no real conception of what they're trying to say the first time they say it, and you've got to like pull it out of them because they're just speaking Ebonics or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your story.
No, that's good input. And then I arrived eventually in California. But before I did, I stopped in Arizona. My car broke down in the Arizona Forest Reserve, and that was a mistake. I probably should not have tried to drive through the Forest Reserve at 2:00 in the morning. If something happened, I didn't red flag that. I didn't think, well, what would happen if a gas pump leaked or something? What would happen? I'd be out there and nobody's coming to rescue me.
This is pre-cell phone, pre-AAA.
Yeah, right, pre-AAA. And I tell you, I had a moment that I did call on God to help me because it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I could not see my hand when I got out of the car because it was that dark.
Yeah.
I looked one way and I could not see anything. I looked back in the opposite end that I just came from, and there were no signs of human life. The only thing was woods and wolves.
Yeah.
And it was a frightening, probably the most frightening time I've ever experienced, I've ever had in my life. My heart dropped. And all I could say was, oh my God. That's all I could say. 15 minutes later, my car started. No water in the radiator because it had all
dumped out. Yeah.
And I was able to drive 15 miles an hour on a soft shoulder into a town called Williams, Arizona. And that town was a town with 800 people and maybe 12 black people. I pulled into a service station. A guy was underneath the car. He pushed himself from underneath the car to greet me, and I could have hugged him. It was the first black person I had seen in the town because I wasn't sure about this place that I was stopping in.
Yeah.
You hear about it in Virginia, where we're from, but I'm miles away from home now, and I have to deal with this issue of, is this going to be a town that's not going to welcome me in it? And
I'm sure the Thomas maps back in the day didn't articulate the
exactly.
environment of the town that you were passing
where to
through.
go and where not to go.
There's no
And
TripAdvisor.
Right. So he welcomed me there, and we became friends, actually. He helped me to get my car fixed. And I remember it cost me $75. That was a lot of money then for me. $75 to get the car fixed. So they had to redo a bunch of things in the engine. And but he invited me to stay in his home, and we did. And then I went out to look for work, and I stopped in a lumber yard, and that lumber yard was turned out to be a saving grace because the owner just did the usual thing that I was already prepared for, because I've already had the experience to ask someone something and they just walk away and refuse because of collecting the quarter from the lot. I'd already had that experience at 9 years old. So I think the point that I'm making about that is that we should cherish all of the experiences that we have, good and bad.
Yeah.
Because you never know how they contribute to where you're going. And I believe that preparation is made for where we're going if we take those experiences and remember them, and if they repeat themselves, if it was negative, be prepared as to how you're going to overcome it or how you're going to approach it the next time.
Yeah, and there's something we've talked about that seems all too popular these days is to become a victim of negative circumstances that happen in your life.
Exactly.
And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this. We all struggle with stuff, and he was struggling with something, and I had a conversation about it because it's something that happened when he was a child, and I tried to help him understand, which is something I've had to do myself, that you can't let those things affect you negatively for the rest of your life because it doesn't serve anyone. You take a 10-minute period of your life that you experienced that may have been abhorrent, and 20 years later, it's still affecting how you walk through the world and how you think,
right,
and how you view yourself or how you view relationships or other people. And, the biggest thing is just being able to dust yourself off and never be victim to anything you've been. I mean, I've been through some stuff in life. Mm-hmm. That the people, as they're watching and listening to this podcast, will get to know and understand. And I've never once felt like I was a victim of any of it.
Yeah.
Maybe a survivor.
Absolutely.
But never have I let it color how I view the world or view people or view myself or, walk into a situation feeling sorry for myself or feeling, aggrieved. It's just, it happened.
Yeah.
And there's this movie that I'm thinking of right now. It's called, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's Tom Hanks is a lawyer, and there's this Russian spy that they catch, and the U.S. assigns him to be his lawyer.
Yeah.
And he he's kind of freaking out, and he's like, well, aren't you upset? Like, don't you, because he knows the guy's in a pretty bad spot where the U.S. government has him detained and, thinks he's a spy and all this kind of stuff. And he's kind of losing his cool on behalf of the guy, and the guy goes, would it help? And again, other bad things happen to him, and he goes, well, what do you think about that? How are you not freaking out about this? He goes, would it help? And that's kind of the way I've thought about and lived my life. At the end of the day is I can freak out and feel sorry for myself and loathe and self-pity. And will it help?
Yeah, right.
Will it make what happened to me not have happened?
Mm-hmm.
Will it make the next day go any better if I just sit there and wallow? And it's not, it's easier said than done, right? I mean, something happens to you, it's hard. And you try and rationalize it and figure it out. And, a lot of people, you want closure in some way, shape, or form. Like, why did this happen to me? But at the end of the day, it's not going to change anything that happened to you. Yeah. It's not going to help.
Exactly. But it does help when you have the process to deal with it when it happens. If you understand the thought process that you need to have to overcome those things when they happen, things that we can't control, it happens. As they say, stuff happens. And having those experiences, having that one experience as a 9-year-old boy has carried me throughout my entire life, because it was a negative experience, but I adopted it and figured out the best way to approach it every time for me to optimize the outcome when something happens that I don't want to have happen. What do I do? And when this person in the lumberyard turned away from me to walk away and say, son, I don't have any work right now, and turned to walk away, that was the same guy that turned and walked away in the parking lot with a quarter, the same person. And what did I do? I followed to give rationale to him why he should be able to hire me. Now, this wasn't done by plan. This wasn't because I was a brilliant kid. It's because of what I had learned, a behavior that I was practicing that I didn't even really know I was practicing it.
Yeah. A lot of it's subconscious.
It was subconscious. It was not conscious. So I followed him and talked to him about why he should, and he finally looked around. He said, I don't have anything. He said, but come on in here. Let me call someone. And he did. He called a gentleman that was building the Ponderosa Inn. You'll pass it when you go by, go through Williams, Arizona. You'll see Ponderosa Inn. I helped to build that. He called this man, very nice man, and sent me over there, and I got a job at $1.80 an hour. That was a beautiful thing. That was, when you don't have any money, and you're trying to get yourself going, and I did. And from there, I was able to make it to California.
And then when you made it to California, tell that story about your first job and who you met and kind of where it took you from there.
My first job, you understand, I came from a small town. We did not know anything about salespeople and direct sales. It just wasn't in my vocabulary. I had no knowledge of such a thing. And I met these very young guys who are friends to this day. And this is 1966. They were law students at USC, and they were running a cookware company, a pot and pans company. And I knocked on the door looking for work, and one of the fellas came to the door and he said, why are you knocking on the door? I said, I'm looking for work. He said, why don't you try coming in the building? Because, when I grew up in a place where you respect people's property. I'm coming from a small town. and he said, why don't you try coming in, talking to the receptionist? And I did that. And anyway, I went to work for this company. They told me that I could make $500 in a week selling their cookware. And if you understand, coming from Petersburg, Virginia,
or coming from just making $1 something an hour,
$1.80 an hour, and someone, $500 a month was a monthly income. at that time. $125 a week. You could hire a lot of people at $125 a week. That was a good salary. Not a high salary, but a good salary, livable salary. And so I remember thinking, well, if they're lying to me, I'll know in a week. He said I could do it in a week. And then I went out with the same lessons that I had learned. They showed me the product. They showed me the benefits of the problem, the value proposition for the customer. And I said to myself, I cannot understand why anyone would not want to buy this. And I had no sales experience. I was not a salesman. I was a believer in the concept. And
you had a different kind of sales experience. Like I said, you learned to sell yourself, or you learned to sell a concept of yourself prior.
Yes.
And I think that kind of laid itself into your sales experience that you ended up developing and fine-tuning.
And I went out my first week, and I gave 13 presentations, and I sold 11 out of 13 people. And I shouldn't say I sold them. I think they were just convinced that this product was something that they needed.
You converted them.
I converted them.
Yeah.
And that was, they broke every sales record that they had. And I was so naive, I could not understand why everyone was being so excited about what I had done. Because they told me I could make 500 in a week, and then when I went out and I did make the 500 in that week, why were they cheering so much? I thought it was the norm to make the 500.
You didn't realize the can was like the lower order probability.
Yeah, right. So these were all like block building experiences that will eventually culminate in the Walter Hill that I became. It did a lot for my confidence, and even when I was made fun of, I remember my third day, I was knocking doors near Venice Boulevard, and it was this big house, and I go into the house, I knock on the door, the guy comes to the door, he looks at me, he sees my kit that I have, and he said, "You want to give a demo?" I thought, my gosh, he even knows the language. I said, "Of course." He said, "Well, come back about 6 o'clock. Everybody will be here, and I'm going to arrange for you to give a demo." Well, this was fantastic. I'm going to give a demonstration to multiple individuals. I'm going to have an exceptional night. I go back at 6 o'clock, and sure enough, he's there. He opens the door, and I go in, and there's a house full of people. And he said, "Excuse me, folks. This young man works for the West Bend Company, and he gets advertising credits when he shows you his product. So I want everybody to pay attention to what he's going to show you." I put my kit down, opened things up, got ready to stack the cookware and to show how it works. You can cook on one flame, and you can cook through 5 pots with one flame, and all this is great. You'll never have to buy another set because it's stainless steel, and it's going to last you forever and ever. So after a few minutes, someone comes out and taps me on the shoulder. And I look up, and it's a nurse. And she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm giving a demo." She said, "Get those things up and come into the kitchen." You see, in Virginia, the sanitarium was on the outside of town. It was brick walled, had guards on the gate. It wasn't a house in the middle of a block. In California, if you were harmless, the sanitarium was a big house, and they'd house all these people in it. That's before the funding was cut, and then they stopped doing it.
Yeah.
So this was a sanitarium. And I was so eager to sell, I missed the sign out front that said sanitarium. Okay. So none of these people were customers. These were all patients.
You were more entertainment.
Yeah. I was entertainment for them.
Yeah.
So, and she said, "Come in this kitchen." And I went into the kitchen with her. And there were 4 nurses in the kitchen. And the owner says, "What were you doing?" So they were making jokes. "You know, we're not going to let you out. You know, we're going to keep you here with them."
You're locked up now.
Say, "You're locked up. We're keeping you here." So he said, what were you showing them? I said, here, I'll show you. I sold all 4 nurses in the honor. And these were natural experiences of what happens in my life to just believe in something and persevere with it. That no matter what the obstacles are, you're forced to recognize them, but you're not forced to allow them to deter you from your ultimate goal. And that's how I did. That's how I functioned. That set the stage for my direction my entire time in California. 2 years later, I had my own company. I had 2 floors of offices on Wilshire Boulevard. Again, most of these experiences, I have to mention that they all happened because there was someone that extended themselves to me, that lent me a hand, and they asked, in most cases, for nothing in return.
I think in modern times, people on average have a pretty firm belief that that doesn't exist, or at least not as much as you'd like it to. And what I found is the same theme throughout my life. I mean, I've had a lot of success, and there's a lot of hard work behind that success, but there's also people in my life who, like a friend of mine, Matt, who I'll eventually have on the podcast, I wouldn't be who I am and where I am today without him. It was period, point blank. I met him similar to you in grad school. I called a guy that worked at a firm called Oaktree, which I ended up working at, which is the firm I left to start this podcast. And he brought me in to meet a bunch of different guys that ran the different groups at Oaktree, you know, senior loans, bonds, whatever the case may be. And he ran the special situations group. And I got to know him just sitting at a table like this, and he was telling me stories and talking deals and things he's done or whatnot. And we kind of just hit it off. And so I started reaching out to him, and I said, hey, can we go grab lunch? Hey, can we go grab breakfast? And he was always willing, and we would sit there and talk, and I would more just listen. I would just listen to him and kind of get the lingo. And, you know, I didn't know anything about anything then. I knew I wanted to be in finance and business, but I had no clue what it was, because growing up, like I said, I didn't have any lawyers or attorneys or restructuring whatever or this or that in my life. It was just low-wage workers. You know, my parents, my mom, remember she worked at Schlegel Lock, like a lock manufacturing plant. My aunt worked at the same plant, or they, you know, worked odd jobs here and there, but none of them ever were professionals. You know, and so when I met Matt, I was just absorbing everything from him and absorbed everything from him. And he saw in me this young man wanting to get after it, and I think he appreciated my story, because one of the things that I've always found to be beneficial is just being who you are.
Yeah.
And being honest about who you are.
Absolutely.
And my whole life, I've just been honest about who I am as a man. When people, it's awkward because I have a non-traditional, unhealthy life story, but it's my life story. And to kind of sugarcoat it or paint it up and make it something it's not is not being authentic, and I don't think it serves me. And so I think him knowing that I was a kid that grew up poor on food stamps and welfare without a dad, and I'm served in the Navy, and I'm sitting in front of him now, you know, inspired to do this thing with no real tools to necessarily go and do it, he started picking up the phone and said, hey, you know, he's got all the relationships in the world in the Wall Street space of investment banking, and he's been doing it for decades, and he's kind of a known entity in that space. And so he started calling around and making phone calls for me, kind of like you did with King Langone, and just getting me in front of people. And that eventually led to me getting my first job in investment banking. They only hired me because of him. Even though I was a good candidate, I killed the interviews and stuff, the reality was, they hired me because I, some relation to him, and they figured they were doing him a favor and eventually would kind of come back around type of thing. Fine. But I got in the seat and then ended up getting the role in investment banking when I was able to learn and to grow and to, come into my own, and first time in my life make good money, decent money anyway. And then when I went I tried to get into restructuring after that, and he helped me with that too. He would reach out to restructuring people and get me in front of them and help get me an interview, and I did some of it on my own, and it kind of all coalesced. And I never got a job in restructuring just because of one is timing. There wasn't a lot of restructuring. This is pre-COVID. This is 2018, 2019 timeframe. So there just wasn't a lot of restructuring work to begin with. And then I didn't have the typical Ivy League background that most kids that get into that, most of them go to Yale or Harvard or Wharton. And most of the people that work in that industry also went to Yale and Harvard and Wharton and Columbia, and they just want to pull up their own people. It's, it's a system, and it's the way things have been, and there's almost no way of getting around it. But because of that, I didn't end up landing a spot in restructuring, but then he helped me get my second job. He said, he's got these guys I know, they're starting a new little shop or whatever, doing private credit and da-da-da-da. You want to take a whack at that? At least you'll get some experience looking at credit documents, which I hadn't had before in investment banking. I was working on the advisory side for founder-owned businesses, more lower middle market stuff, and there wasn't a lot of debt documents. It was more selling equity. Some of it structured, some of it just common or whatever, full sales or whatnot. And I wanted to go work for his group. And I had told him when I first met him, I kind of idolize this man. You walk into this, 30th floor of this building, and there's just marble office tables and all this beautiful stuff everywhere. And, the guy that founded the firm, it's two guys, one's Howard Marks, and the other's Bruce Karsh. You see him on MSNBC, and you hear people talk about his memos and all this kind of stuff, and I just wanted a piece of that. Like, I wanted it. And so I had told him and communicated that to him. And so he got me the job in private credit as a way, to help me get that experience. So I appreciated it. And I had kind of written off that I would never get an opportunity to do what I really wanted to do, which is work at Oaktree. And I had kind of gotten to the point where I had resigned myself that I had to think of something different. But I just kept chugging along at the end of the day, and I kept chugging along, and I kept interviewing, and I kept trying to expand myself. And then eventually one day I get a phone call, and it's Matt. And he said, hey, we've seen what you've been doing. You've been getting after it, and you've been working really hard, and we've seen that you've been trying, and we want to give you a shot. Well, you got a spot for you. And he pulled me up into Oaktree. And that's one of the most brilliant days of fulfilling days of my life, because it validated all the hard work and all. But at the end of the day, that would have never happened without that one man. Seeing me and wanting to share that with me and wanting to bring me up and pull me up. And, he has no reason to do it realistically. He's a self-made guy. He's made millions of dollars and flies private and does all that stuff, and he's a busy human being. But he took that time over all those years in aggregate to take care of me and to honor me showing up and me trying, even though I failed plenty once I got into banking and trying to get other jobs and trying to grow my career and things of that nature. But, without him, I wouldn't be here today. And I know that's, the same with you. But I think going back to the original point, so many people don't feel that. I think they don't work through life with that assumption. And I think it is harder in places like California, where it's probably less prevalent overtly that people are looking out for other people in that regard. But that's the only way anybody gets anywhere. Where no one's an island and no one can do it all by themselves. And to be open to accepting that is huge, I think, to being successful in life and achieving the things you want to achieve, because no one's going to do it all by themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the most gratifying things in my career is now that I can put my focus on more on life balance. There's no one thing regarding my career anymore. As I mentioned, I celebrate my 80th birthday this year. The thing that becomes more important than anything is the relationships I have with people. Starting with my wife, and making sure that I continue to nurture a 30-year marriage and loving relationship with her. All of these things takes a continued effort. There's no guarantee. For example, I've been married for 30 years. There's no guarantee I'll be married another 30 years. It requires a consciousness and awareness of that human being, of that person, and showing the love to them. Not talking it, but showing it.
I think it's a very important concept that I'd love to dive into, because what's going on in contemporary times, on social media and in society, is there's like this red pill movement. I don't know how much you've heard about that, but there's a lot of poor examples of how men should approach relationships with other people, and especially women. And as a man of your accomplishments in life, you're a successful entrepreneur in a time where the world wasn't designed particularly to promote young black men to be successful entrepreneurs, but you did it anyway. Formed your own business, had a lot of financial success, and I'd love for you to talk about, because I know from years of conversations with you, but how you met Bonnie, first of all, where you guys were in life when you met, and then how you approached that dynamic, because I think there's some great points in there that people could take a lot away from, especially in today's day and age, of how you can be a successful, hard-charging man and still be soft in the home and have a wife and love on her and treat her with respect and kindness. And
absolutely.
You can both be successful human beings, professionally, personally, whatever. It's not a competition, and men aren't the only ones that have the mantle of being a breadwinner, of being the successful one, of being the center of attention. I mean, that's gone back and forth, I know, for you and your relationship in the last 30 years. So I would love for you to kind of describe that, because I think not enough people see that, especially young men.
I love to share, my story, but I never feel that it applies to everyone. There's no one size fits all when it comes to relationship and relationship building. I was a bachelor. I was, as I mentioned, married very young, divorced very young, 25 years old, and I was single for some 25 years, and had not really planned to marry. I always felt that once I matured, that marrying was something that I should be unequivocally inspired to do, not something I decided that I was just going to do. In other words, I want to get married. No, I don't agree with that, and I'm against it for a man or a woman. I believe we should live our lives, and when that person comes along, that you're the right match for her, she's the right match for you, allow it to develop. And that's what I did with Bonnie. I was not looking for a wife. I was living, I had bought a small ranch up in Newcastle, California. Beautiful, beautiful area, beautiful place. I was growing grapes, and just as a hobby, wine grapes, and it was a lot of fun, to go out, put your hands in the dirt, and prune the vines, and it was a lot of fun. And I met her at a business. I would commute back and forth. I'd had an apartment in L.A. and the place up north, and I commute back and forth. And I went to a business dinner once, and I saw a very lovely woman, walk into the room, and with a very striking presence. And it just occurred to me, I'd like to meet her. I'd like to know who she is. There were no thoughts of romance. It was just, I'm up there, I'm doing business, I'm living there, and I'd like to meet her. And before I could introduce myself, the event started, and turns out she was a guest speaker. She was secretary to the state of California in Pete Wilson's administration. I didn't know that at that time. After she spoke, I went up to her and introduced myself. And later on, when I went back to L.A. Here, and then I went back home, I saw the brochure with her face on it, and I said, that was a lovely person. I think I'll give her a call. So I called her, and I said, I met you at the dinner last week, and I was the guy that commented on your haircut because I liked her haircut. And she says, oh, yes, I remember. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about doing business with the state of California. And she said, well, why don't you tell me what it is you do? I don't like to do business lunches. They're not good for my digestion. why don't you just tell me what you do and I'll refer you to the right person? I said, well, in that case, let me be perfectly honest. I said, I'm a new guy on the block here in California. I mean, and I don't know a lot of people. You seem like a lovely person. I thought maybe we could have a cup of coffee or something, and what I have in mind wouldn't offend your husband. I have no idea if you're married or not, and it wouldn't offend your husband. So she didn't say she was married or not. She said, okay, we'll have a quick breakfast. So she allowed me to meet her at a restaurant across from her job so that if the conversation didn't go well, she could make a quick
Pull the escape hatch real quick.
And get to work. Anyway, we met and we talked for 2 hours. Had breakfast and talked for 2 hours. And that was the beginning of our friendship. We became friends for 8 months before we started to court. And as soon as we did that, 4 months after that, she was offered a job as dean of the McIntire School of Commerce at the University of Virginia. And of course, I'm from Virginia. So as soon as the relationship started to blossom, she to take off. Well, I didn't want her to miss out on such a great opportunity. And by this time, I had taken the time to know who she was. And without admitting to myself that I was in love, I knew that there was a depth to the relationship and it would not end even if she moved out of the country. I knew it.
Felt it in your bones.
I felt it in my bones. Yeah. So I said, well, that's great because it gave me a chance to see my dad. My dad was still living in Virginia. I said, I'll go home, I'll come and see you and we'll meet, different parts of the country. And we parted. She went that way. I stayed here. And I went back for an anniversary. One of my friends had their 25th anniversary. And she went with me to that. And we were sitting in the car. And we were talking about matrimony. And because I was such a committed bachelor, I don't think she thought that I would ever think about marriage because she wasn't thinking about it.
Yeah.
And
she had been divorced prior.
She had been married
Yeah.
and divorced. Her husband had passed away 16 years earlier. So she had been single a long time. And it occurred to me that there was no reason why I would not marry her and love her for the rest of my life. And it came over me. I realized it, and I looked at her and I said, "Would you marry me?" I had no ring. I had no preparation. Nothing. It was very spontaneous. And
this is at the party or after the party?
This is after the party. We were sitting in the car talking, and not a very romantic setting.
Yeah.
Petersburg, Virginia. Nothing romantic about it, but it was real.
Yeah.
It was real.
It wasn't staged. It wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very real. And I have never had a doubting moment. I asked her to marry me, and even after that, when I went back to California, I never had one thought of, did I do the right thing? Should I be getting married? Those thoughts just has never entered my mind. And it's been 32 years.
I've got two questions for you. One, what example did your father set for you in how to approach women in relationships and how to think about women in relationships? Because I think today, more than ever, young men get such a poor example. Like body count is a word that gets thrown around a lot. That it's young men are taught to ascribe their value to how many women they can bed, how many women they can pull, as we say, and not necessarily think about that other person as a human being necessarily, and then not think about valuing themselves enough to not walk the world in that way where they're just out there trying to get laid, essentially.
Yeah.
And then also, what was it about Bonnie that made you feel that comfortability or that peace that made you know that she was that person in your life, that you wanted to have her be that person in your life? I think a lot of people these days date for long, extended periods of time, and they don't have the answer to that question. And I think they stay together because they've been together, but they don't necessarily come to that point where they have that epiphany that you had, where you look at a human being and you say, there's no way I want to live life without you in it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be honest and show that to you, and wherever the chips fall, they fall, but I'm just going to be real with how I feel. And I think that's very lacking today in contemporary relationships. So just curious, your experiences and your thoughts on those two things.
I was able to recognize very early on in our relationship that there's no such thing as going to be a perfect relationship. You're not going to find a perfect mate, because I was likely not going to be a perfect mate for someone else. But I could be a loving mate, and I could be a forgiving mate, I could be a compassionate mate, and I can be an understanding mate. Those are the things that are within the realm of what I could accomplish. Perfection, I never claimed that, and I never expected that. And once I got to know who my wife was, and I fell in love with her, I fell in love with past her image, because she's very beautiful. But you can't marry and stay in love with physical beauty.
Yeah,
that is not enough.
When you wake up 10 years into an awful relationship, the fact that your wife is hot or used to be hot is going to have zero bearing on how you feel that day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And getting to know who she was and seeing the background that she had, the experience that she had as a young girl with people abusing her mother, and she publicly has stated this, her mother was an alcoholic. So she grew up in an environment that initially, when I heard her story, I said to myself, I'm going nowhere near this person, because there has to be baggage that I don't think that I would be able to overcome.
Yeah. And when I met Bonnie and finally got the chance to sit down with her one-on-one, we were having dinner one night and you were off doing something, and we just started talking, and she was telling me her life story. The woman I met, I would not have imagined, to your point, that she had gone through any of that, because
not have imagined
she glows.
She has a light in her.
Yeah.
She is a lovely human being, and I am thankful all the time that she picked me for her husband. And one of the things that I've tried to really understand now, and I do a lot of reading about, the good life and what's worth wanting, and that's why even more so over the years, I put more focus on the value of my wife, my 3 daughters, my grandchildren, my friends like you, are all important to me. And it fills my life with an incredible amount of peace and joy. And if I had to encourage people to, about finding the good life, is finding enough of those things that are meaningful to you, that are meaningful like they are to me, and focus those things. Enjoy those things. Enjoy the peace that comes with loving your family and loving your loved ones and appreciating your wife. And again, I reiterate, it doesn't mean you're going to have a perfect flow of everything that happens. It's not going to happen. You're going to have some hiccups. You and the wife will have some misunderstandings. That will happen. Will likely happen.
Yeah.
I'm saying it doesn't have to happen, but it will likely happen.
I think the most important thing is that you have similar core values.
We have the same core values. My wife is one of the most prominent corporate board members in the United States. At least she was when she was active.
Yeah.
She's not as active anymore. At one time, she was on 7 or 8 major boards. Lead director for Home Depot. It goes on and on and on. And she was always in the company of some of the richest, most powerful names in the country, men. Because it was predominantly men
millionaires and
on those
billionaires.
boards.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. People with a lot more physical, tangible resources than I have. And the way I think that I have been so blessed is that it's because not just of me, but because of who I believe she is, that I never had a doubting moment. Never had a moment of concern, or I never went into those environments feeling out of place.
Insecure, self-conscious.
Self-conscious. You know, she's a heavy hitter in her field. My business was, you know, an entrepreneur with a lot less fanfare, you know, a lot less recognition, a lot less headlines, you know.
Respectable but not wide known.
Respectable but not well known. Yeah. And I accepted that. I accepted my success. I thank God for my success. And, you know, I was able to earn more than what I need, and enough to support family and build an asset base and have a good life. And I've always been happy for my wife. And there were examples of it when I would go, because sometimes when you're in that position, you really do have to examine yourself, your ego. And I would go to the university, and the spouses would be making cookies and selling cookies at the table.
You were one of one men.
And here I am, I'm the only guy.
Yeah.
Only guy there.
How are your cookies?
And I sold the cookies. I gladly sold the cookies, because there were no limitations to what I would do to support my wife. It has everything to do with how she treated me.
Yeah.
She always held me in high esteem. I knew that because of what people would say. I was at an event in New York. It was a black tie event. The speaker got up, and one of the corporate CEOs, and he'd say, and we all know of Bonnie's love for Walter. Okay. What does that tell me? That told me my suspicions were right. Is that when I'm not around, she still holds me in the same esteem that I hold her.
You're still with her even when you're not there.
I'm still with her.
Yeah.
And so all of that together just led to a very positive existence that I enjoy very much right now. Yeah.
I remember you telling me a story how when you were at the ranch and you had that conversation with her, and you guys decided to get married, and you said you didn't think twice about, because you owned the ranch at the time, adding her to the title and making everything that was yours hers. You weren't concerned
I did
about
not have any possession that I wouldn't share with her. Yeah. And it's not just because I was in love. It's because I knew who she was. And how could my ranch be worth more to me than my life? I'm about to share my life with this woman. and so my property was not something that, and she felt the same way about anything that she had. She would give to me, give me part of it, give me all of it.
Yeah, she never used her success or her station in life at any point in time as a cudgel.
Never.
Never.
It's just not a part of our existence. So, I hope that everyone can have the experience that I have had with my wife, Bonnie. I wish that to everyone. To be able to look into someone's eyes and see them look back at you with love.
And adoration.
It's a wonderful thing. It gives you courage. It gives you happiness. It's a wonderful thing.
And I've seen it live in action. I remember when you were getting honored. I think it was at the the Black Chamber of Commerce event, and you invited me along with you.
Black, Greater Los Angeles African American Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. And we were walking out afterwards. You had your speech and you got awarded, and everything went on. And then as we were leaving, someone walked up to you and they handed you a card, and they were chatting with you and said they wanted to connect and whatnot. And I just watched Bonnie watching you intently in that whole exchange, and she was taking everything in. And as you started to walk away and you went to put the card in your pocket, she grabbed you and she asked you for it. And she said, "I want to make sure." And she wrote down something on the card to kind of help you remember or whatnot.
Yeah.
And she slid it into her purse. And that just was such a highlight for me to see a woman and another human being, the way she was caring about you, and such a subtle, simple thing. But she completely owned this desire to take care of you and to make sure that this person that you had this conversation with, that you followed up with them, and that she helped you do that. And you maybe you would have followed up with them anyway, maybe you wouldn't have, but it was just very adorable for me to see this woman that is on the board of Bank of California and Rand Corporation and all these different things, and has all the success and accolades and everything. In that moment, all she was your wife.
Yeah.
And all she wanted, and she was elated for you to be celebrated. And I think that everyone should aim for that, and I think everyone deserves that. So it's definitely been very very helpful to see your relationship for me, because I'm twice divorced, and growing up, all I've pretty much seen are unhealthy relationships. And so to see, especially someone of your stature and your success and your accomplishments, you and Bonnie, and to see the way you love on each other, the way you treat each other, the way the family is when they come together, it's all love. Every single time for Christmas and Thanksgiving, your house is just full of people laughing and smiling and having a good time, and there's no propensity, there's no any of that stuff. It's just all love. And so it's amazing. It's amazing to see, and I'm glad to have been able to meet you so that I could experience that and know that that's what I want on the third try.
That's what I described. You're doing the right thing not to give up.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, there's no exact science of how it's done. It's just you don't give up, and it's what I described as the good life. What you just talked about. That's how I describe a good life. It's not being a billionaire. I mean, not that I object to it.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt.
I like nice things.
No, that hurt. And if an opportunity had come along that I thought that I could expand it that far, I would have done it.
Yeah.
But it didn't, and I am still with an outstanding career and life and balance in my life. I have daughters that express their love all the time, that I never speak to either one of them, and I don't hear the love in their voice. It comes through the phone. And I think that you're on your way to experiencing that, because little Bella is just the loveliest little person.
Yeah.
And she's a dad's girl, so you will have that experience.
Yeah. And I feel that with my 16-year-old too, my oldest daughter Elijah, where unfortunately she doesn't live here, but she's at that age where it's just cute when she'll just FaceTime me and text me and call me, and we just have a great relationship, and that's all that matters in life to me as well. And I always, going back to the work story, I had ascribed value in myself to my work. And this experience I've gone through the last couple of years with getting divorced again and kind of having an awakening on some of the things in my life, I realized that, like I said, I have value regardless, and work is just part of who I am and doesn't define who I am.
Absolutely.
And I remember when I went through the divorce the first time, I was in the Navy, and I didn't feel like I could do what I needed to do to make sure I could, unfortunately, I got to a point where I had to fight to be in my daughter's life, and I had felt this pull of, serving my country and doing that role, and then also being a dad. And what I came to realize from that experience, being years away from my time in the military, is that, it was great to serve my country or whatever, but it doesn't, and at the end of the day, it matters not to my daughter and my family and my life. And so when I had this most recent situation, and I had a 3-year-old, and I was working in private equity and working 100 hours a week, and I was making good money. I was making $400,000+ a year, and life was easy and life was good in the sense of like I had monetary stability. But I just looked at that little baby girl and I said, I can't do that again. I have to be in her life the way I want to be in her life, and I can't be working 100-hour weeks and be a good dad.
Yeah.
And years from now, I'm not going to care that I made $400,000. I'm not going to care that I worked on XYZ deal that was, seemed so cool. I'm going to care that I sat on the floor with my kid and rolled around and made her smile and made her laugh and made her feel seen and gave her the love that I didn't get, so that she can walk through the world, hopefully, and have more analogous experience to you, where she's just walking through the world with supreme confidence and love and care for herself, and she feels that from the family and the people around her, so she can tackle anything in life with her head up and her chest out.
Absolutely.
And to me, like you said, that's all that really matters. Nowadays everybody gets caught up in, celebrity and financial spoils, but it just doesn't matter.
No.
You need money to keep a roof over your head and feed your family, but and like you said, I'd love to have a boat. I'd love to be in Newport, one of those multi-million-dollar homes, and be able to hang out on my back patio and look at the water and watch a football game. But I'm not going to sacrifice being a good family man and a father and a friend to have those things, because I've met plenty of people who have all the monetary wealth in the world and they're empty, and I don't want to be empty.
Yeah.
I want to be full.
Right. Good comment.
Yeah.
Good comment. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And if that's the direction that you're setting for yourself, then you're on your way. Just the reality of it first is where you have to get to a point where you acknowledge what's important. And I think I was just reading something not long ago, we're asking the question, is what you want worth wanting?
Yeah.
Someone says, I want to be able to have a boat. I think I like to think they're saying, I'd just like to be able to afford it if I want it. Not necessarily I want to have a boat, because that's kind of empty to just want a material thing in your life. But filling your life with a lot of memories with people. I recently lost a cousin that I was very close to, and I just went back east to speak at his celebration, and I talked about the things that endeared him to me, and that were important to me, and those are the memories that we have, and I'll always have those memories. I like to take my wife Bonnie on special trips, because we're accumulating memories. I like to share, because we talk about when we went to Rome, this happened. We were in Florence, that happened. We were in Siena, then we went to Israel, and then we went to here and went to Morocco. We went to the various places. I said, remember, I bought you this, and we were walking down the street in Morocco, and we have so much fun remembering it. And I think that at some point in life, you just keep creating new and wonderful memories.
Because you can lean back on those things.
You lean back.
You can't lean back on that nice watch you got, or that car
right.
you used to own, or whatever the case may be. But like you said, you can lean back on that lunch you had in Tuscany overlooking the vineyards or whatever, and remember how you feel in that moment, and it can heal you.
And if it's not with your mate right then, it could be a friend. It can be, I always think that it's important, because the best relationship that I've had with a woman has been the woman I'm married to. And that's because we started as friends. We got to know each other before we hugged, for example. We'd see each other, and I remember she loves to remind people of how in our first things that we did together, activities, she always paid her way and I paid mine. Well, I was trying to be respectful of that she was a professional woman, and if we were true friends, then occasionally I might pick up a tab, but not anticipated because I'm the male. I'm going to pick up the tab.
Yeah.
Right. That's not friendship.
That's not how the zeitgeist is today.
That's not friendship. Friendship is you and I go out sometimes. You'll pick up the tab. Sometimes I will, or sometimes we just go Dutch.
It's equitable.
Yeah, it's just whatever happens at the time, but it's not understood that you're always going to pick up the tab. So if we're friends, we do that. So she makes jokes about that now, of how we always went, and she paid her way, and then after we started the court, of course that was different. She was my sweetheart, so it was.
Yeah. It all evens out in the end.
Yeah, it all evens out in the end.
Yeah.
And now, when you've been married for 31 years, it's she'll take me to dinner, I take her to dinner. It doesn't matter.
All comes out of the same pocket.
It's all that comes out of the same pot, so it doesn't matter anymore. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, as I always do.
I have as well.
And
I hope to have you back and have more of these. I think we just basically scratched the surface. I think on who you are as a man and the things that I think that people could glean. But it's just thank you for coming and being willing to sit down and help me through this first one. It's been a great experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's, just like there's the podcast, it's called No Boundaries. I hope there's no boundaries to, what we can accomplish and what we could do. And
absolutely.
I think, years from now, you'd be sitting there at home watching and, seeing the kind of conversations we're having with the kind of people, and I think you'll be proud of it. And I think, you'll always get to know that you were at the start, the infancy of it. So thank you very much, Walter Hill. I love you to death.
You're welcome.
And we'll look forward to doing this again in the not too distant future.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.